A United States senator just turned a voting rights hearing into a history lecture about the Ku Klux Klan, and nobody in that room stopped him. What you are about to see is Ted Cruz spending his entire allotted time not defending the Constitution, but building a case that the Democratic Party, and not the maps being drawn right now in 2025, is the real threat to Black Americans. It is a rhetorical move so calculated, so choreographed, that if you don't know how it works on you. So before we watch it, I'm going to show you exactly what he is doing, why it lands the way it does, and the one question he never let anyone ask.
I would point out that my colleague from Hawaii questions whether or not people would be overtly discriminatory in the words that they would say. I will just point out to the California map maker who said the number one thing he was focused on was creating a racially gerrymandered district. So people do say it. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a moment ago, our colleague, Senator Hirono, said there's a lot more to say, and indeed, she's right. And in fact, I want to go back to her comments. She began by saying we have a long history of racial discrimination in this country. That's undoubtedly correct. And then she said, quote, we had poll taxes, we had literacy tests, we even had tests of how many jelly beans are in a jar. Mr. Chamberlain, when Senator Hirono says we had poll taxes, I want to ask you who we is, and in particular, what party was it that implemented poll taxes in the South?
I mean, I don't want to necessarily speak in every single case, but I'm pretty confident it was mostly the Democrats.
And what party was it that put literacy tests in place in the South?
Same answer, mostly the Democrats.
And what party was it that had tests like how many jelly beans are in a bottle?
The Democrats.
Tell me, what party were the founders of the Ku Klux Klan from?
I'm pretty sure that was the Democrats.
Indeed. In fact, Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the Klan, was a delegate to the 1860 Democrat National Convention. What party wrote the Jim Crow laws in the South?
The Democrats.
And so on this side of the aisle were members of the Republican Party. Who was the first Republican president?
Abraham Lincoln.
The Republican Party was literally founded to oppose slavery. We came into existence because slavery was a grotesque evil, and it was President Lincoln, the first Republican president, who signed the Emancipation Proclamation, who won the Civil War, and that resulted in the freeing of the slaves and the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. By the way, fast forward to the Civil Rights era. Bull Connor, one of the most noxiously racist politicians. What party was he from?
He was a Democrat.
The Democrats, for the entire history of their party, have been a party based on racial discrimination. They affirmatively embrace it. They support it. Let me ask you, Mr. Grime, is discriminating based on race consistent with the United States Constitution?
No.
What does the 14th Amendment say about discrimination based on race?
It's prohibited.
What does the 15th Amendment say about discriminating based on race, and in particular drawing congressional lines and explicitly discriminating based on race?
It's prohibited.
Now, the Democrats are fond of telling this story that is, and I wish I could find a kinder way to say it, a flat-out lie. That without discriminating based on race, that no African Americans will be elected and no Hispanics will be elected. Indeed, there was one fellow online who was a vocal left-wing spokesperson who tweeted out, if I'm advising anybody to run for president, they sure as hell better have a solution to how you make sure that it's not another 100 years before another black person can represent South Carolina. So that's a typical Democrat statement, that we cannot elect a black person in South Carolina without discriminating based on race. I want to ask you, Mr. Chamberlain, who is the junior senator from South Carolina right now?
That would be Tim Scott.
And, all right, I'll tell you what I said online. I said, hey, Grok, who is Tim Scott? And why do Democrats think he isn't black? And by the way, was Tim Scott elected because of a gerrymandered district drawn only to elect an African American?
No, he won statewide.
He won statewide. By the way, the Democrat position is you can only elect African Americans with a gerrymandered district. I will point out Burgess Owens, an African American, is elected in a majority white district in the state of Utah. He's a Republican. Byron Donalds, another African American, is elected in a majority white district in Florida. He is a Republican. John James, another African American, is elected in a majority white district in Michigan. He is a Republican. And my own congressman, Wesley Hunt, who represents me in the House of Representatives, he is elected in a majority white district. He is a Republican. And yet, in the Democrats' world, you're not black if you're not a liberal Democrat. There is an arrogance to African American voters. By the way, they also have that same arrogance to Hispanic voters. They say you're not Hispanic if you're not a liberal Democrat. Well, I'll tell you, I am proud to be the first Hispanic ever elected to represent the state of Texas in the United States Senate. And Mr. Chamberlain, in my election in Texas, was I elected in a gerrymandered district that could only elect an Hispanic?
No, you were elected statewide.
Discrimination based on race is wrong. Final question. The Democrats are now clutching their pearls that seats drawn to elect liberal Democrats in the South are going to go away. You may get black Republicans instead. Indeed, in Tennessee, they're freaking out that a liberal white guy who's a Democrat is likely going to lose his seat to an African-American woman who's a Republican, and they say that's horrible racial oppression. My final question is this. If you look nationwide, which party has egregiously abused gerrymandering for decades? Both parties are guilty of it, but who has been the worst offender? And in particular, take New England. Take Massachusetts, take Connecticut, take Rhode Island, take Maine, take Vermont, take New Hampshire. How many Republicans are elected from all of New England in the House of Representatives?
I think the answer to that is zero.
Zero. They've drawn every district in a naked gerrymander, and yet they're very upset that their illegal pursuit of power has now been stopped by the Supreme Court that is enforcing the Constitution and prohibiting the racial gerrymandering and discrimination their party is built on.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman?
Padilla.
Mr. Chairman, part of personal privilege.
Sure.
I feel personally aggrieved to sit here and to be lectured by my colleague from Texas. And this reminds me of the time when he was first elected to the Senate, and the Judiciary Committee had a hearing on gun safety, and he felt a need to lecture Dianne Feinstein, who was a leader on gun safety legislation, and he took that opportunity to lecture Dianne Feinstein about gun safety and her leadership on the issue. And she said to him something along the lines of, I did not sit here on this committee for however many years she did, only to be lectured by you, and that is how I feel. So why don't you just stop lecturing the rest of us? Just because you think you are the smartest person in the world doesn't mean the rest of us agree to that, okay? Thank you.
Senator Hirono,
Senator-
I knew
Senator Cruz.
Dianne Feinstein. I served with Dianne Feinstein, and you're not Dianne Feinstein.
All right, Senator Padilla. We're done. Senator.
Ted Cruz just walked into a Senate hearing on voting rights and spent his entire time on something nobody in that room was prepared for. Not defending any map, not challenging any evidence. He was building a prosecution against the Democratic Party's history going back 150 years. And if you don't know how that move works, it works on you completely. What you're about to see is not a legal argument. It's a magician's argument. I'm going to show you both hands because the one you're not supposed to see is the one that actually matters. Let me start with what most people don't realize about this hearing. The Senate Judiciary Committee was not convened to debate American history. It was convened to examine racial gerrymandering, the practice of drawing congressional district lines in ways that dilute or manipulate the voting power of minority communities. This is a live legal issue. Federal courts have struck down specific maps. Lawsuits are active. The question before that committee was concrete. Are the maps being drawn today violating the Constitution? That's where the hearing was supposed to go. And then Cruz began to speak. His first move was elegant, and I want you to notice it carefully. He agreed with Senator Hirono. He said, yes, America has a long and shameful history of racial discrimination, poll taxes, literacy tests, jelly bean tests at the ballot box. He nodded along as if he was building toward accountability. And then, with that agreement still hanging in the room, he turned to a witness and asked one question. Which party did all of that? That's the pivot. And everything that followed was built on it. What Cruz performed has a name in political rhetoric. It's called historical burden shifting. You take a legitimate accusation, and instead of addressing the present, you flood the room with the past. By the time he finished asking about the Ku Klux Klan, Bull Connor, and the Jim Crow laws, this hearing was no longer about maps drawn last year. It was about events from a century and a half ago. The subject had been changed, but it sounded like it hadn't. Here's what most people miss, and it's the reason the argument is so effective. The history Cruz cited is not wrong. The Democratic Party of the 19th and early 20th century did enforce poll taxes. It did write Jim Crow laws. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the first Grand Wizard of the Klan, was indeed a delegate at the 1868 Democratic National Convention. These are documented facts. And that's exactly what makes the argument land so hard and mislead so effectively at the same time. That's the mechanism, and Cruz is very good at it. The conclusion he wants you to draw is this. Since Democrats built the architecture of racial oppression in the past, their present concerns about voting maps must be insincere. But the argument collapses the moment you ask the question he made sure nobody got to ask. What happened between then and now? The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and one of the most dramatic partisan realignments in American political history. Southern Democrats who opposed civil rights legislation left the party over the following 2 decades. Cruz knows this. He's a Harvard Law graduate and a former Supreme Court clerk. This was not made in confusion. It was made by design, for an audience that would feel the facts without the context to challenge the conclusion. Now to the part of his argument that is genuinely dangerous, not just historically slippery. Cruz argued that majority-minority districts are themselves a form of racial discrimination. He pointed to Tim Scott in South Carolina, Burgess Owens in Utah, Byron Donalds in Florida, all black Republicans, all elected in majority-white districts. His conclusion? You don't need race-conscious maps to elect black representatives. Democrats who say otherwise, he said, aren't protecting anyone. They're being condescending. Those elections happened. They're real. But here's what the argument buries, and the burial is not accidental. The Voting Rights Act's majority-minority district requirement was never designed for exceptional candidates with broad cross-racial appeal. It was a structural remedy for communities where racially polarized voting had, case after case, produced legislatures that did not reflect the people they were supposed to represent. 4 election results do not rebut a body of evidence built across decades. Federal courts have said so repeatedly, finding specific maps unconstitutional for using race as the predominant factor. There's one more move that I keep coming back to. He mentioned Tennessee, that Democrats are upset a white Democrat might lose his seat to a black Republican woman, and call that racial oppression. But the Voting Rights Act was never just about ensuring someone of the same race holds a seat. It was about ensuring a community can elect the candidate they actually prefer. If a district was drawn to give a community that voice, and a map redraw eliminates it, that is the precise harm the law was designed to prevent. He substitutes racial representation for representative choice. They are not the same thing. And collapsing that distinction is not an analytical error. It's a deliberate reframing designed to make constitutional protections appear not just unnecessary, but offensive. Senator Padilla told Cruz to stop lecturing. He invoked Dianne Feinstein, the moment she told Cruz he hadn't earned the right to lecture her after decades of her own work. Cruz's response: I knew Dianne Feinstein. I served with Dianne Feinstein. And you're not Dianne Feinstein. Sharp, clean, and completely beside every argument Padilla had actually made. Which maps are being drawn right now? Who benefits? Whether the Constitution is being honored or exploited? None of that was answered. It was barely asked. That's the method in full. Use the history lesson to displace the present question. Use the punchline to escape the substantive one. End with something memorable enough that people walk away thinking they witnessed an argument, when what they actually witnessed was the absence of one. Democratic institutions don't collapse in a single dramatic moment. They collapse in 100 moments like this one, where the real question gets buried under an emotionally satisfying detour, and nobody notices nothing was answered. The question Cruz walked into that room with was simple. Are the maps being drawn today consistent with the Constitution and the Voting Rights Act? He left without answering it. And that, more than anything he said, is what you should remember.